Albus Dumbledore did not fear Voldemort most. He feared himself and the version of power he once believed he deserved. Before he became the guardian of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore was a prodigy who believed the world would be safer under his rule. He is remembered as the wisest wizard of his age. But wisdom was not his beginning. It was the restraint he learned after discovering how dangerous his brilliance truly was, and how many paid the cost for it. Ah, greetings, traveler. You've found your way back to the Silver Quill Corner. I am Grayfen, the story keeper. Long ago, when I was bound to an ancient wizarding family, I learned that stories carry a magic older than time itself. Here, we explore wizarding history, hidden truths, and the deeper lore of the Harry Potter world. If the murmur of quills and the echo of old corridors bring you peace, press like, subscribe. Tell me, Keeper, from what city, realm, or corner of the world are you listening? I'd love to know how far these stories have reached. The world Albus Dumbledore was born into was already changing. Across Europe, old certainties were beginning to fracture. Muggle cities swelled with iron and smoke. Railways cut through countryside that had once known only hoof and foot. Machines learned to imitate thought, and with every year, secrecy demanded greater effort. The wizarding world watched closely, aware, if unwilling to admit, that concealment would not remain effortless forever. It was during this unsettled moment, in the warm stillness of August 1881, that a child was born in the village of Mold-on-the-Wold. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore arrived quietly. He was the first child of Percival and Kendra Dumbledore, and for a time, their life was unremarkable in the best possible way. Percival was a principled man, firm in his convictions, employed by the Ministry of Magic, and guided by a belief that rules existed to protect the innocent rather than to command them. Kendra, a Muggle-born witch, was precise and reserved, her magic controlled, her love practical. Their home was orderly, not rigid, calm, not austere. In those early years, the house was open to the world. Windows stood unlatched. Laughter carried freely from room to room. Nothing yet required concealment. Albus grew within that calm, observant, rather than demanding. Magic surfaced early but never violently. Objects shifted when he focused. Light bent when his attention held. Even as a toddler, he seemed to sense that magic responded best when treated with care. 2 more children followed, Aberforth, earthier and less patient with stillness, and then Ariana, the youngest, bright, unguarded, and unaware of the danger her own magic would one day draw. In the summer of 1891, in Mold-on-the-Wold, Ariana Dumbledore was playing near the hedge at the edge of the garden. The air was still, the kind of day that asked nothing of the world and promised nothing in return. Her magic surfaced the way it always did, instinctive, unguarded, without intention or fear. No different from laughter rising too loud or tears arriving too quickly. She did not know she was being watched. 3 Muggle boys had been hiding nearby. They had seen the movement, the impossible moment when the world did not behave as it should. They stared. They whispered. Curiosity sharpened into alarm. They stepped forward. They demanded she show them again. Ariana could not. She did not understand what they were asking. She only knew the fear that arrived when attention fixed too tightly upon her, when the thing inside her stirred without warning. What followed was not magic. It was panic. The boys' fear sought an outlet and found one. What they did to her was clumsy, cruel, and driven by the instinct to destroy what could not be explained. Ariana survived, but something in her did not. She returned to the house altered in ways no spell could smooth over. Her body healed. Her voice did not return in the same way. The ease with which her magic had once surfaced was gone, replaced by dread. She learned, in that single afternoon, that what lived inside her was dangerous. The world had shown her what happened when she was noticed, when power slipped loose, when eyes lingered too long, so she pulled inward. Every spark was smothered the moment it stirred, every instinct swallowed before it could rise. She felt danger in every movement. Silence felt safer than pain. But the magic did not disappear. It pressed back, tightened, curdling like a storm trawling to break free. An obscurus, a parasitic manifestation of repressed magic, rare, unstable, and almost always fatal. And for Albus Dumbledore, standing at the edge of that moment, it was the first lesson that would never leave him, that being seen could be dangerous. Percival Dumbledore did not speak when he saw his daughter. He did not ask questions. He did not shout. What he felt moved too quickly for language. Percival left the house that evening. What followed was not justice as the ministry would have defined it. He found the boys who had watched, demanded, and then broken what they could not understand. He used magic against them, not to kill, but to punish. When the authorities came, he did not resist, and when they asked him why, he said nothing. Percival understood what explanation would cost. A frightened child examined, a girl reduced to a case, Ariana taken from her family, confined for the sake of secrecy, watched for the rest of her life as something dangerous rather than loved. He would not allow that, so he accepted the role the world was willing to give him. A violent wizard, a man driven by hatred, a criminal. He was sentenced to Azkaban without defense. The irony was not lost on those who knew him. A man who had always believed in order and restraint, now erased by the law he once respected. He would die in that prison years later, never seeing his children again. But Ariana remained at home. That was the bargain. With Percival gone, the weight of the household fell entirely upon Kendra. 3 children, one of them fragile in ways the world could not be trusted to understand. Questions began to surface in mold on the wold. Neighbors watched, voices lowered. Speculation filled the space where truth could not exist. Ariana became a shape glimpsed at windows, a presence rarely seen, a girl quietly labeled before anyone bothered to know her. Kendra did what she had learned to do best. She withdrew. She built a smaller world for her daughter, safer, quieter, narrower. And in that narrowing space, Albus watched something else take form. The knowledge that love sometimes demands sacrifice, that protection can look like condemnation, and that silence chosen carefully can shape a life as surely as any spell. In the years after Percival's imprisonment, Albus's brilliance sharpened under pressure. He read constantly, turning theory and history into tools. Texts meant for advanced scholars did not deter him. By the time he was 9, he was already writing letters, careful, precise, to witches and wizards whose names appeared in academic journals, or soon would. He asked questions that revealed how closely he read, how little he accepted at face value. Replies came back measured. He did not write to be praised. He wrote to understand how the world had been arranged. But intellect was only the beginning. He watched his mother carry the house alone. He learned Ariana's rhythms, the signs that often came before her episodes, the moments when intervention mattered more than words. He learned how to lower his voice, how to redirect attention, how to remain present without feeding fear. He was still a child, but childhood had already begun to recede. Long before he had language for it, he learned that happiness could be postponed. Alongside restraint, something else took root: ambition. The conviction that structures could fail those they were meant to protect, and that brilliance left unused risked becoming negligence. Kendra moved them to Godric's Hollow. It was a place shaped by centuries of magic, built to outlast attention, not invite it. A village that had learned long ago the value of discretion. The move changed very little for Ariana. Her magic did not lessen with isolation. It gathered like a storm pressed inward, surfacing without warning, breaking calm as easily as glass. Aberforth stayed close to her. He learned how to steady her when fear rose too quickly. He remained present when others stepped back. His care was immediate, fierce, and loyal. Where Albus calculated, Aberforth absorbed. Where one anticipated, the other endured. Kendra grew narrower in focus. Days shaped around caution. Doors closed more often. Conversation shortened. In the space they left behind, speculation took hold. A squib, some whispered. A fragile child. A subject best avoided. Truth required very little effort to replace. Albus withdrew further into study. Books remained reliable. Within their pages, outcomes followed causes, and restraint carried no penalty. Knowledge asked patience, but not sacrifice. Batilda Bagshot lived nearby, and she noticed him. She saw a boy who listened longer than required. She recognized the signs of a mind forming under pressure. She did not interfere. She understood the cost of interference. She remembered, and she watched from a distance. Letters came as they always do. By the time Albus left for Hogwarts, Godric's Hollow had settled into its version of the Dumbledore family. Quiet, contained, largely misunderstood. He did not leave behind peace. He left behind the carefulness that had defined his days. Hogwarts entered Albus Dumbledore's life without ceremony, and the world he had been bracing against finally shifted. For the first time, he stepped into a place where his questions did not need to be softened, where attention was not a threat, where curiosity was not something to manage, but something expected. He did not feel triumph. He felt space, where responsibility briefly loosened its grip. On his first day, before reputation could form, he noticed Elphias Doge. The marks of dragon pox made the boy easy to avoid, and most students did. Albus crossed the bench and took the seat no one wanted. He spoke first, and he stayed. The friendship settled quickly, and it remained. He did not see a risk. He saw a person. Hogwarts gave Albus something he had not known he was missing: permission. Within the castle's walls, curiosity was expected. Magic was examined, argued with, questioned openly. Nothing had to be hidden. Albus thrived there. Where others learned how to perform spells, he wanted to know why they worked at all. Understanding felt safer to him than repetition ever had. If he could understand how things worked, perhaps they did not have to fail so often. He admired spells that wasted nothing. In them, control looked almost like peace. Teachers noticed early. His work drew attention without ever seeking it. His work was exact, his spell-casting efficient. Every movement had a reason. He showed little interest in display and less in competition. What mattered to him was not being seen, but being correct. Rumors followed him regardless. Some students whispered about his father. Others speculated about his views on Muggles. Admiration and suspicion moved together, indistinguishable at a distance. Albus ignored both. He had already seen how easily stories formed without evidence. He trusted reasoning more than reputation. He studied relentlessly. Ancient runes, magical theory, subjects chosen for difficulty rather than prestige. His progress was steady, undeniable. By his 5th year, he was made prefect. By his 7th, head boy. The titles mattered less than the access they granted. Awards followed. The Barnabas Finkley Prize for exceptional spellcasting. Appointment as British Youth Representative to the Wizengamot. Recognition arrived without changing his habits. He noted the honours, then returned to the work. Only with Elphias did he speak freely. Late conversations stretched into the night. They spoke of ethics, of responsibility, of what power demanded in return. Albus spoke of a world more just than the one he knew, a world where brilliance was not wasted, where difference did not invite punishment, where children like Ariana would not be hidden away. He believed understanding and guidance could prevent harm. He did not yet question how easily guidance could become control. As the years passed, those ideas remained unfinished, thoughts explored, not yet tested. Some professors took quiet notice. They sensed a mind that did not merely analyze ideas, but moved instinctively toward questioning them. They recognized a student unafraid to reach conclusions early. Holidays pulled him back. Each return home narrowed his world again. Responsibility resumed where ambition paused. While classmates traveled or planned futures, Albus remained bound by obligations he did not choose but would not abandon. He loved his sister. He resented the limits her care imposed. Both truths remained. Albus graduated in the summer of 1899 with the future open before him. Invitations arrived from across the magical world. Apprenticeships were offered. Further study beckoned. He planned a grand tour with Elphias Doge, Bulgaria, Egypt, Scandinavia, places where magic wore older shapes. 2 weeks later, the owl arrived. Kendra was dead. Ariana's magic had broken free without restraint. This time, there had been no one close enough to stop it. In a single morning, Albus's plans collapsed. Travel vanished. Opportunity withdrew. At 18, he found himself responsible once more for Ariana, for the remnants of his family, for a future that had narrowed without warning. Grief and frustration settled deep and quietly. He had done everything asked of him, sacrificed early, waited patiently, and still the world took and demanded more. He returned to Godric's Hollow knowing this was not an ending. It was in that season of collapse, after plans had been made and unmade, after grief had already settled into habit, that Gellert Grindelwald arrived in Godric's Hollow. He came to stay with his great-aunt, Bathilda Bagshot, whose house stood close enough to the Dumbledores that paths crossed naturally. Bathilda had known Albus since boyhood. She had watched his brilliance form quietly, without interference, and she recognized at once that something in him had shifted. The weight he carried had not lessened with time. It had sharpened. Grindelwald was newly expelled from Durmstrang, not for mischief, not for arrogance, but for magic pursued without restraint. Durmstrang tolerated ambition. It respected power. For it to cast someone out required more than curiosity. It required danger. Yet, when Albus met him, none of that was immediately visible. Grindelwald was articulate, intense, effortlessly charming. His intelligence was quick, his confidence disarming. They found one another at precisely the wrong moment. Days turned into long conversations. Conversations into arguments sharpened by agreement. They spoke of magic as a governing force rather than a tool, of secrecy as stagnation, of the ministry as an institution that had mistaken caution for morality. Grindelwald had ideas, not crude domination but order. Wizards, he argued, already possessed power. The only immorality lay in refusing to use it responsibly. Albus listened. He responded. Together, they built a philosophy that felt rational, even compassionate when spoken aloud. Wizards would lead, the world would be reshaped, suffering would end, conflict would be managed, not endured. It was intoxicating. For Albus, this was not only intellectual, it was personal. He had spent years watching power misused through fear and withheld through bureaucracy. He had seen what happened when magic was treated as something to hide rather than something to understand. And beneath all of it, there was grief. Grindelwald did not dismiss that grief. He redirected it. Their bond deepened quickly. Too quickly. Letters written later would reveal how completely Albus gave himself to the connection. He wrote of finally being seen, of meeting an equal, of futures shaped together rather than endured alone. Affection was useful. Trust was leverage. It was during this summer that the Deathly Hallows entered their shared imagination. Albus knew the legend intimately. Together they traced the tale backward through history and bloodline. Godric's Hollow itself became part of the mythology, the resting place of Ignotus Peverell, the brother who chose invisibility over conquest. The idea was irresistible. mastery over death, mastery over fear, power made permanent. For Albus, the temptation carried an additional weight. The resurrection stone whispered of what he had lost, of parents taken, of the possibility, however illusory, of restoration. While these visions expanded, Aberforth watched. He saw Ariana left alone more often. He saw conversations stretch late while responsibilities went unattended. He saw his brother turn outward, chasing abstractions while reality frayed. Where Albus saw destiny, Aberforth saw neglect. Tension grew steadily, fed by silence rather than confrontation, until silence failed. The argument came on a hot August afternoon. Aberforth had discovered the plan. Albus and Grindelwald intended to leave together. Ariana would be left behind. Responsibility would pass without consent to a brother who had never claimed it. Words turned sharp. Aberforth accused Albus of abandoning his sister for ambition dressed as morality. Albus answered that his talents could not be wasted on one life, however dearly loved. Grindelwald intervened, not to calm, but to assert. Bonds were drawn. What followed was confusion, movement without control, magic colliding without intent. Spells struck walls, furniture shattered. The house, already strained by years of containment, could not hold. Ariana came downstairs. She did not understand what she was seeing. She only understood fear. A flash of light crossed the room. No one ever knew whose spell it was. Ariana fell. Silence followed, absolute, irreversible. Grindelwald fled. He did not look back. Albus never learned the truth, and that uncertainty became its own punishment. Whether the fatal spell came from his wand or another's mattered less over time than the knowledge that his choices had brought them all to that moment. Aberforth never forgave him. They spoke again. They worked together. They stood in the same rooms. But something essential remained broken. Aberforth knew that guilt was not limited to the hand that cast the spell. Albus carried that knowledge for the rest of his life. Years later, when asked what he saw in the mirror of Erist, the answer was simple. His family, whole, unbroken, a future that ended in a single afternoon. In later years, when asked about Grindelwald, his answers were measured and spare. He spoke of ideology, of error, of responsibility. He did not deny the bond, but he refused to adorn it. Some truths, once spoken too clearly, regain their power, because Gellert Grindelwald had not merely been a mistake. He had been a mirror, reflecting Albus's highest gifts and his most dangerous instincts at the same time. In loving him, Albus glimpsed the man he might have become had power gone unanswered. That knowledge never left him. It lived in every delay, every deliberate silence, every moment where he chose restraint over certainty. So when Dumbledore warned others about the danger of power, he was not offering theory. He was remembering a summer when brilliance outran wisdom and love arrived before caution. And when he finally faced Grindelwald again, it was not victory he sought. It was an ending, and the hard-earned understanding that even the greatest magic demands humility, and that some loves, however true, must never be followed to their end. If I can pause here, if only for a moment, because most lives are not undone by villains but by timing, by loving too early, choosing too boldly, or mistaking brilliance for readiness. Many of us carry a summer we do not revisit, a version of ourselves we learned to outgrow the hard way and carry with us in memory. If this story stirs something familiar, it is not because you are a broken traveler. It is because you have lived long enough to understand that wisdom often arrives after consequence, and that restraint, once learned, becomes a quiet form of courage. He carried more than grief from that summer. He carried the knowledge that his own brilliance had been bent toward harm, that ideas meant to heal had instead learned how to wound. Ariana's death did not only end a life, it ended a version of himself. The young man who had once believed the world could be corrected through force of will vanished alongside her. What remained was quieter, heavier, and bound by restraint. From that moment onward, Albus Dumbledore would measure every choice against the cost of having been wrong once before. In the months that followed the funeral, ambition curdled into something unrecognizable. Every dream he had once chased now felt dangerous to touch. Power no longer promised clarity, influence no longer tempted. What he wanted, what he needed, was atonement shaped into action. When a teaching position in Transfiguration became available at Hogwarts, he accepted without hesitation. It was a modest post for a wizard of his intellect, one he could easily have surpassed. The ministry would have welcomed him. Research institutions would have competed for him. He declined them all. Prestige held no appeal. Redemption did. Headmaster Phineas Nigellus Black was taken aback by the absence of negotiation. Albus asked for no privileges, no special allowances. He came to work, to serve, to give more than he took. And in the classroom, something fundamental shifted. He no longer sought to astonish. He sought to cultivate. His lessons were precise, patient, and quietly demanding. Transfiguration became more than technique. It became an exercise in restraint, intent, and responsibility. He spoke often of change, but never of dominance. Objects could be transformed, he taught, but only when understood fully, and never without consequence. Students responded to him differently than they had to the prodigy he once was. Their respect came not from awe, but from trust. He lingered after lessons. He listened. He noticed who struggled and why. He wrote letters, offered guidance, and stood between his pupils and the harsher judgments of the world beyond the castle. Somewhere in that work, he began to rebuild himself, carefully, deliberately, into a man who would never again confuse authority with virtue. Over time, his philosophy hardened into something resolute. Power, he came to believe, was not a mandate to rule, but an obligation to protect. Leadership was not the right to decide for others, but the duty to prepare them to decide for themselves. He distrusted grand visions, especially his own. That suspicion became his safeguard. It made him cautious. It made him worthy. In 1938, nearly 4 decades after Ariana's death, that restraint was tested. Albus was tasked with visiting a boy in a London orphanage, a child whose magic had already begun to bend its surroundings. Tom Marvolo Riddle was clever, composed, and unsettlingly aware of his own difference. From their first meeting, Albus felt the chill of familiarity. Here was intelligence without empathy, charm without conscience. When Tom spoke of control, of punishment, of superiority, Albus recognized the danger immediately. Throughout Tom's years at Hogwarts, Albus watched where others praised. He listened where others admired. He offered guidance, not indulgence. Their relationship settled into a careful stalemate, one testing boundaries, the other waiting for proof. Dark patterns emerged. Artifacts vanished. Animals suffered. Silence grew heavier in certain corridors. Beyond Britain, Gellert Grindelwald was rising. The philosophy they had once shaped together now marched openly across Europe, wearing the language of salvation and wielding cruelty without hesitation. Each report felt personal. Each atrocity echoed with familiarity. Letters arrived urging Albus to speak, to condemn, to act. He did not. Not yet. He knew that confronting Grindelwald meant confronting himself, and he had learned the cost of acting before he was ready. Instead, he prepared others. His classrooms became lessons in self-mastery. His mentorships focused on judgment, patience, and moral courage. He watched for those who could resist certainty, who could hold power lightly. He knew a war was approaching, and he refused to let the next generation inherit his mistakes unexamined. By 1945, the world could no longer wait. Grindelwald's empire stretched across the continent. Nurmengard stood as a monument to terror, its walls inscribed with a slogan Albus had once believed in. The ministry came to Hogwarts not with authority but with desperation. They begged him to act. Albus listened, and then he refused, not from cowardice, but from fear rooted deeper than any duel. Facing Grindelwald meant reopening a grave he had never truly left. The letter from Bathilda Bagshot ended the long delay. It carried no plea, no command, only truth. Grindelwald was moving again, and this time his path curved back toward Godric's Hollow, toward the place where everything had first gone wrong, toward a grave that had already paid too high a price for other people's ambition. Albus understood at once what that meant. He would not allow Ariana's resting place to become a symbol or a threat or a stage. Some reckonings could not be postponed. Some debts did not diminish with time. He left without announcement, without witnesses, without the comfort of reassurance. The journey to Nurmengard felt less like a march toward battle than a slow descent into memory. Each mile carried him closer not only to Grindelwald, but to the version of himself he had spent a lifetime restraining. They met where the consequences of power could no longer be hidden. Grindelwald greeted him as though years had merely folded inward, as though the world had paused politely while they pursued separate interests. He spoke easily, warmly. The old charm remained intact, the brilliance, the confidence, the careful intimacy of shared language. He offered the same future they had once imagined together, still convinced that Albus's absence had been hesitation, not refusal. And perhaps, on some level, Grindelwald had always understood the imbalance between them. Albus had loved him. That much was undeniable. The letters proved it. The silences confirmed it. Grindelwald, however, loved the idea of Albus. The mind, the legitimacy, power magnified by devotion. To be admired by such brilliance intoxicated him in ways nothing else had. What mattered was that he knew that love existed, and that he learned how to wield it. There had been a vow once, not spoken aloud to the world, but sealed in blood between two young men who believed themselves invincible. A promise that neither would ever raise wand against the other, forged from trust, intimacy, and shared conviction. A blood pact, preserved in crystal, bearing the mark of the Deathly Hallows itself. It was this pact that bound Albus long after doubt had taken root, long after love had curdled into regret. For years, it was not cowardice that stayed his hand, but magic of his own making, a consequence born from the same certainty that had once convinced him the future belonged to them both. The pact had not faded with time. It had endured, absolute, unyielding, until the moment it shattered. When it broke, it did not dissolve gently. It ruptured, a violent end to a promise that should never have been sworn. This time, it failed. Albus listened, and then he refused, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with the clarity of someone who had lived long enough to count the cost. The dreams Grindelwald still cherished had already become graves. The duel that followed was not born of hatred. It rose from responsibility. Magic tore across the mountain like a storm-given will. Spells collided with force enough to fracture stone and bend iron. The air itself seemed to recoil. Witnesses later said it could be heard from miles away, a sound like thunder, like the world itself protesting what had been unleashed. This was no ordinary duel. It was the detonation of decades of love corrupted, ambition unleashed, and restraint finally abandoned. This was not a contest of skill alone, but of belief. Two philosophies meeting at full force, neither willing to yield. Grindelwald fought with fury sharpened by certainty. Albus fought with restraint honed by regret. In the end, power did not decide it, acceptance did. The Elder Wand changed hands. Grindelwald fell, defeated, not destroyed. And in that final moment, Albus chose mercy. To kill Grindelwald would have been simpler. It would have silenced the past. Imprisoning him meant living with it, and Albus Dumbledore had learned at last that living with one's choices was the truest form of accountability. Victory brought no comfort, only resolve. When he returned, he carried not triumph, but burden. Power, once more, rested in his hands, and he treated it as a test he would never stop taking. He wanted his students to leave Hogwarts with more than skill in their wands. He wanted them to leave with a sense of restraint, an instinct to pause before power, to measure consequence before action. Magic, as he had learned too late, was never neutral. It took the shape of the hand that held it. One of Albus Dumbledore's most enduring convictions was that people could change. The boy who once spoke eagerly of reshaping the world had been broken by what those dreams cost him. From that fracture grew a quieter resolve, that no one was beyond redemption, but no one should be trusted with power unexamined. This belief shaped how he ruled his school. Where others saw disruption, he saw warning signs. Where discipline was demanded, he chose conversation. He spent long evenings speaking with students who frightened their teachers, listening more than correcting, searching for the fear beneath the defiance. He did not excuse cruelty, but he refused to believe it inevitable. He remembered too well how easily brilliance could drift into danger when left unchallenged. Then Harry Potter arrived. From the moment the boy stepped into Hogwarts in September of 1991, Albus understood the weight of what lay ahead. Harry was not what legend had promised. He was smaller, quieter, carrying more loss than triumph. He did not move like a child raised in praise, but like one accustomed to being overlooked. Yet there was something unmistakable in him, a capacity for loyalty and sacrifice that struck Albus with a sharp, familiar ache. It reminded him of Lily Potter, and of everything he had failed to protect. Harry wanted what most wounded children want: belonging, certainty, someone who would choose him without condition. And that hunger made him brave and vulnerable. Albus knew the truth he could not yet speak, that the boy carried a fragment of Voldemort's soul. That survival, in the end, would demand the most terrible price. The knowledge sat with him like a slow-burning poison. He told himself he would never become the man Grindelwald had been, never trade lives for outcomes. And yet the path before him offered no clean choices. So he taught carefully. The trials Harry faced in his early years at Hogwarts were never accidents, though they wore the mask of chaos. The Philosopher's Stone was never truly unguarded. The protections in place were far beyond Quirrell's reach. But courage must be tested to be understood. Loyalty must be chosen under pressure. Albus watched, not to harden the boy, but to learn who he was becoming. The Chamber of Secrets brought Harry face to face with Tom Riddle's memory, the first true glimpse into the mind of the enemy he would one day confront. Albus observed closely, not the outcome, but the response. Fear revealed much. So did mercy. By the third year, when Dementors circled the grounds and despair crept into the corridors, Harry learned to summon light from within himself. The Patronus was more than a spell. It was proof that joy, once known, could still be reached, even after loss. Albus knew that lesson would matter. With each passing year, the moral weight grew heavier. Severus Snape would later speak the words Albus feared most, that he had raised the boy for slaughter. The accusation was not false. It was incomplete. Albus never stopped wrestling with it. In the long hours before dawn, he wondered if restraint was merely a prettier name for delay, if he had learned nothing at all. But there was one difference he held to fiercely. Harry would choose. Everything Albus did was bent toward that end, not obedience, but agency. The conversations in his office after each disaster were never lectures. They were attempts to build discernment, to teach a boy not how to win, but how to decide. Even when absent, Albus watched. Through allies, through instruments, through quiet arrangements no child could see. Harry was never as alone as he felt. And that too was a risk, to guide without enclosing, to prepare without breaking. When Voldemort returned fully in 1995, Albus knew the war had entered its final movement. This time, he understood the enemy: Horcruxes, fragmentation, fear of death sharpened into obsession. Time, however, was no longer his ally. Marvolo Gaunt's ring confirmed what he had long suspected and punished him for acting on it. The curse was swift and merciless. His hand darkened. The clock began. Worse still, the ring was more than a vessel. It was the resurrection stone. Alone in his office, with that weight in his palm, temptation whispered, forgiveness, closure, faces long lost. For a moment, just a moment, he wavered. Then he remembered the cost of clinging to the dead. Some magic did not heal. It only reopened wounds. During Harry's 6th year, Albus finally revealed the truth in fragments. Memories chosen with care. Not to terrify, but to contextualize. Voldemort had not been born monstrous. He had become so. And that distinction mattered, because it meant the path could be refused. Albus knew he would not live to see the end. So he planned his death. Not as escape, but as protection. Draco Malfoy's soul would be spared, Snape's position preserved, Harry's path clarified. The astronomy tower became the final repayment of an old debt. His last word, please, carried not fear, but trust. Trust that even the most damaged could choose differently. Afterward, his presence lingered. In portraits, in a will that was not inheritance but instruction. Objects chosen not for power, but for patience, memory, and loyalty. When the truth of his past emerged, it wounded those who loved him. Harry most of all. The image cracked. The man beneath was harder to reconcile, but that reckoning was necessary. Heroes who cannot be questioned become tyrants in waiting. In the end, Harry chose as Albus had hoped, freely, knowingly, without coercion. Love answered violence. Sacrifice dismantled fear. Evil collapsed under its own refusal to change. And in the quiet place between life and death, Albus waited, not as a master, but as a man finally willing to be seen whole. Regret and wisdom side by side, no longer asking absolution from others, but granting it to himself. Albus Dumbledore lived many lives within one. Prodigy, idealist, failure, guardian, strategist, teacher. He was brilliant and fallible in equal measure. His greatest strength and his deepest flaw sprang from the same source. A mind that reached too far too quickly, and a heart that learned painfully to slow. His legacy was not perfection, it was choice, and that perhaps was the truest magic he ever passed on. And perhaps that is why Albus Dumbledore still matters, long after the duels, long after the legends. Because his life reminds us that wisdom is not found in how much power we gather, but in how often we choose not to use it. We all carry moments we would undo if time allowed it. Words spoken too quickly, loves followed for longer than we wished it had, silences held unbearably so. Dumbledore shows us that the past does not demand erasure, only responsibility. That redemption is not a single act, but a lifetime of smaller, quieter choices. And if there is comfort to be found in his story, perhaps it is. Even after our worst mistakes, even after the cost has been paid, it is still possible to choose differently. Not to rule, not to be right, but to protect. And sometimes, that is the greatest magic of all. I hope you enjoyed this tale, traveler, and if so, please do like and subscribe. It would mean the world to me, so we can continue to bring these tales to you across the world.